I'll turn to Bill Leahy, who has been appointed by many courts to represent poor people facing criminal charges who otherwise would not have counsel. And Bill, we were talking before, but this weekend, Ethan Bronner in the Times wrote an article called "Right to Lawyer Can Be Empty Promise for Poor." People may have seen it. I'll read you the first couple sentences and then ask just for you to react. Billy Presley spent 17 months in a Georgia jail because he did not have $2,000 for a child support payment. He had no prior jail record, but also no lawyer. In Baltimore last fall, Carl Himes, 21, was arrested on charges of shining a laser into the eyes of a police officer. Bail was set at $75,000. He had no arrest record, but also no lawyer. In West Orange, New Jersey last summer, Walter Bloss, 89, was served with an eviction notice from the rent-controlled apartment he had lived in for 43 years after a dispute with his landlord. He had gone to court without a lawyer. Bill, from your perspective as a defense counsel, public defender, your experience in the courtroom, and your perspective over these years, can you talk for a bit about your view? These stories were from 2013. What's your view about the impact of Gideon over the past half century?
Well, it's a very complex picture.
Mike's right there.
One of the points that the excerpts that you read point to is that there is no uniform standard or quality in the United States. I think when Gideon was decided, the hope was, the dream was, as Tony wrote in his book, would every person, regardless of wealth, feel sure of the support needed to have an effective defense and a lawyer by his or her side, and would the lawyer who was appointed feel sure that he or she would have the support that is necessary to provide an adequate defense. And the good of the past 50 years is that we have literally not just hundreds, but thousands of lawyers who have dedicated their careers to providing effective representation for poor people. And I have been privileged to work with many, many lawyers who are at the absolute top of their profession, not just the indigent criminal defense profession, but the entire profession. Poor people's Abe Fortas's, if you will. And some states, and I like to think that Massachusetts is one of them, have done a quite impressive job of extending that right to everyone who has the legal entitlement to it. But in many other jurisdictions, and the jurisdiction I work in now in New York, in upstate New York, one of the things we are now doing 50 years after Gideon is extending the right to counsel at the first court appearance when bail is set. In most of New York State, that right does not now exist 50 years later, which is a shocking thing. I did not know it when I was in Massachusetts. And it is typical of many other states. I think the Baltimore case that you cited is unfortunately very typical. The other factors, notwithstanding the many good lawyers who work at making the Gideon dream real, there are two major national realities that have to be recognized and I hope can be addressed in the second half century. One is that this federal constitutional entitlement under the Sixth Amendment is absolutely unfunded. The entire burden is placed on the states and the localities within those states. The federal government has contributed next to nothing over 50 years in the way of financial support and in the way of nationally applicable standards to guide the representation. What level of representation is expected? The second thing is that even worse than the unfunded federal mandate is that the federal government, almost from the inception of Gideon, with at least starting about 10 years later, has devoted billions of dollars, and even billions annually, to state and local criminal justice efforts, but it has virtually all been on the prosecution and police side. And that's not only creates its own imbalance, but these very federally funded programs are often accompanied, number one, by no consideration whatsoever to how this more intrusive law enforcement is going to require more defense services. So no thought to that, no support for that. And secondly, we've gone from a kind of middling nation that incarcerated about 100 of its citizens per 100,000 in 1963 to the most incarceration-ridden nation on the planet, and by a significant margin, to the mid-700s now, 7 times in terms of the ratio to population. So we've become a much, much, much more punitive society. In the course of that, the burden, and then the final factor I should mention is that, and I think everyone knows this, but just to underline it, the Supreme Court at the same time has constantly extended the Gideon right to juveniles, to civil commitment proceedings, to suspended sentences that can result in incarceration, to misdemeanors. So the right grows broader, the nation becomes more punitive, costs spike up, there's no support. 28 states have done a passable job of at least addressing structurally their own state's issues. 22, including New York, regrettably, have not. And so there are just many, many more forces at work in a negative or punitive kind of way that have kind of washed the Gideon dream and submerged it. It hasn't drowned it, but has submerged it, so that there's an awful lot of work to be done.
Thank you.